Hi everyone, I'm Pranoti, host of Under the Microscope. This series is brought to you by the Real Scientists Nano team. Our goal is to provide a platform where scientists can communicate their work and interact with the public. With that in mind, every week we introduce you to a scientist working in the field of materials or nanoscience, who tweets from the Real Scientists Nano Twitter account, which is realsci_nano. Hi everyone, my name is Pranoti and I am the host of Under the Microscope podcast. And today we have with us Stephanie Gallant, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Montreal in Canada. I do not know why I am saying Canada instead of just saying Canada, but I feel like it's because I'm super excited to speak.
You're excited.
Yes, I'm super excited to talk with you and your research with plasmonics and biomarker. It's so cool. Let's start with understanding your career journey so far. So today you are a postdoc at University of Montreal. How did that happen? Tell us.
I guess some parts conventional, some parts unconventional. It was never originally my plan to do a PhD necessarily, but I've always liked science. I've always had that curiosity that kind of really pushes you to have to answer those questions of like, why does something happen, or what can we use it for? And so I started researching about, I guess, halfway through my undergraduate degree, around 2014, towards the end, I guess. I had a professor who I was taking a class with her, an upper level, third or fourth level class. And the lab portion of that course was a little different than the other courses, where this professor that I had, she's very much about self-directed research and, not giving students a pre-structured lab that they just follow the instructions. She really wanted us to make your own experiment and troubleshoot, and which is more the reality of science, right? Which we all realize when you're then left to figure your own things out. A lot of things don't work as planned. You have to do a lot of problem solving on the fly versus those earlier lab courses where everything's very structured, very perfect. And so I really liked that, and I kind of ran with it. I was really excited to dig into the literature and see what I could do with the materials we had. And so pretty early on in that class, we were meeting about the research project that I came up with, and she offered me basically a work term meant for undergrads, that she had a few positions in her group. So I said, that sounds awesome. I had been wanting to get into research, and so I accepted that. I had other jobs in the chemistry department, but they were more like admin and some lab development, more like writing and not actual research. So so I took that position, and I actually started working in a little bit of polymer chemistry. So she was doing, she had a master's student who was doing imprinted polymers, and still with the idea of sensing, but the idea that you have a polymer that's imprinted and a molecule you want will fit perfectly into the mold almost. So that was interesting, and I got pretty involved with that project. I'd be going to the actual grad student and being like, so I was thinking about, and she was probably thinking, this isn't your project. But clearly I was excited about research. And so that student was almost finished anyhow. So after that work term, the same professor who then became my PhD supervisor, she moved me to so I started another work term with her. And then I basically was getting one, regularly, because she knew I was interested in what she did. And so I jumped onto another bigger research project happening in her group. And this was a project between our chemistry department, and this is I didn't even mention, this was in Memorial University, which is in Newfoundland, which is actually where I'm from. So super East Coast Canada, the furthest east actually in North America. So, sorry?
You're closer to Europe.
Yeah, closest to Europe. Yeah, exactly. So, so I'm in Quebec now, but this is in Newfoundland. And so the big project that I ended up being on was between our chemistry department at MUN, the engineering department, and a few different research groups in both of those disciplines. And the overall goal of the project was developing technology basically for working in cold waters. Where in Canada, we have the Arctic Ocean above us, but also cold water streams in the Atlantic. And so part of the challenge is sometimes what you develop doesn't work at in different conditions. So the specific part that I was working on was in Raman sensing, and more specifically surface enhanced Raman. which uses plasmonic materials to enhance the signal that we can get from our sensor, but therefore for what we're trying to detect. And that was really cool. And so that was my first time really getting into spectroscopy beyond just standard lab courses, especially Raman. In terms of spectroscopy and vibrational, most people know IR spectroscopy. It's much more common. It's a little more straightforward. But Raman spectroscopy is a little bit like the sister of IR, right? We're talking still vibrations of bonds, but there's just some differences in between the two. But at the core, similar concepts. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so I found I really liked that. I liked the practical aspects of all of this. So it's not just theoretical. We're actually following through on all these theory, all this basis of knowledge, and then actually carrying it out to a workable product, a workable, sensor. And so, yeah, I thought that was really cool. And so as I graduated with my BSc in 2016, mm-hmm. and I didn't necessarily have a plan after that, but my supervisor, Erica Mercerod, she said, well, if you want to stay for a master's, you could do that. And I was like, okay, that actually sounds good. I think I'd like to do a bit more of this research. I think, higher education is still interesting to me, even though it wasn't the plan the whole time, I guess. I kept my options open, but I said, okay, yeah, so I'll do that. And so, yeah, so I moved into a master's degree with her. And part of the reason I stayed with her as well is not only, getting along well with her and the group and liking what we did, is that she also gave me the opportunity to develop my own project. So, a lot of graduate students, and it's just the way projects go. If you're entering a group that has, 20 years of different versions of a similar concept, you might join and they'll say, here's the piece that you will be doing, and you're told what your project will be. And a lot of the time that's how it is, and it's for, a number of practical reasons. But yeah, I thought it was cool that she just said, she gave me ideas of here's where you could pick up on previous projects that people have left off. But if you want to make your own, you can do that. And so I thought that was pretty cool. Oh. Yeah. And so, yeah, so I was still thinking in SIRS sensors and in Raman, in, two-dimensional materials or otherwise. And I kept reading about, different nanoscale sensors and nanoparticles, which I was quite interested in, because things on the nanoscale, they get different properties than the same thing in a as we say, a bulk amount, which just means, a bigger amount that works together. So on the nanoscale, weird stuff happens, and we can use that weird stuff to create new sensors and more sensitive things. And so I kept reading about nanoparticles that are called core shell, where it means the base of it's one thing. So you have the inside is one thing, and then it has like a wrapping, a layer on the outside of another thing. And a lot of them were traditional SIRS, traditional plasmonic materials on the outside, gold, silver. And then they were using magnetic iron oxides on the inside. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. But the more I read the papers, the more I realized they were basically just ignoring that the iron oxide was there. They were using it because it's magnetic. They could just move their particles around. So for them, it was practical. But I was reading all these papers, and they're completely ignoring any properties, any contributions of these metallic magnetic particles on the inside. So I thought, what if we use those as our main sensing material? Can they be used as a main sensing material? And the idea is a little bit out there. There isn't that much on it. And my supervisor was like, let's find out, I guess. So so we moved into that, and the project took off from there.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a little, looking back, I'm like, that's a little crazy. I could have stayed with something a little more standard, saved myself some headaches along the way, maybe. But, in the end, things worked out pretty well. And it was cool. Yeah, the project got to incorporate, again, being in materials chemistry, you're right in the middle of so many things. It was some inorganic chemistry, some physical, some analytical, a little bit of, engineering, if you want to think of it that way. And again, with that real world, the goal at the end, the real application. Mm-hmm. And so, so I was tinkering away with this for, the 2 years of my master's. It was towards the end, and my supervisor had been saying, you could stay for a PhD. And I was like, I didn't come here to do, I don't know. And eventually I was like, the project has me hooked, and I need to see what happens. And that's really I was having a good time otherwise, but that's really what kept me in, is just, I need to find out more. I need more time. because as we know, yeah, research takes way longer. You think something will take a month, it'll take 3 months. And it goes from there, right? So in 2 years, I was like, I'd made good progress, but I was like, God, it's so much more could be done. And so I was like, okay, it wasn't my plan, but at the last minute, I basically switched from my master's to a PhD, and I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's take the plunge, right? Yeah, and so it was cool. So it gave me more time to explore what I had been working on, try a few new things I had wanted to that I wouldn't have had time if I just finished up with the master's. And part of that, and the more interesting part of my project, was branching into some analogous magnetic materials. So I mentioned iron oxides, pretty standard. They're very well studied, but what people are doing is they're kind of switching out some of the metals or adding little bits of other things and seeing how that changes the crystals, their properties. And again, when we have a specific use in mind, it's really important to try to optimize those properties if you can. So I started working with some cobalt ferrites. And so it's the same crystal structure, very similar properties, but you're swapping out one of the iron valence states for a cobalt. And of course, that does change some things in your crystal lattice. It changes the properties of them as a whole. And so we actually ended up getting the sensors that we made with them were better performing than the iron oxides. And so that came down to a few things where, I mean, the whole time we're trying to narrow down, okay, they're working, but why are they working, and how could they work better, and which property is actually most important for this sensor. And so moving on to the cobalt ferrites, we kind of were able to remove some of the possibilities and saying, well, we don't really think it's this property or that. And a lot of it came down to either the geometry of the particles, because some of the cobalt ferrites were actually, we got some different shapes, whereas the iron oxides are all very spherical, your classic nanoparticle. And yeah, we had some octahedra, some disks with the cobalt ferrites. And so with plasmonics, it's not only the material and having those free electrons, but the geometry as well. And so you get what are called hotspots. And it just means at a pointy tip of a metal, you'll get a more concentrated electron cloud. And so when you're hitting it with the light, you get more activity. And again, the goal is increasing that electromagnetic field, increasing the signal of your Raman response. And so as you get more and more dilute sensing, this is really important, of course. So yeah, so we figured it's either that geometry or the increased magnetic parameters, the different magnetic properties of these cobalt ferrites. And so this kind of like was a confirmation as well that this sort of new class of sensors, where people weren't really looking into magnetism as a major factor in plasmonic enhancement and Raman, et cetera. And yeah, so that was kind of cool. So there's still a lot of work to be done there, but I think that was it was important for us to see kind of a confirmation that, well, what we thought is possible is at least happening to some degree. And so this is kind of paves the way for, more people, hopefully in the future, to branch out and look at different magnetic things. We also did a bit of work about applying a magnetic field on the surface while we're actually sensing, while we're collecting our data. And we also saw increased performance there as well. So this is like, okay, we know that light fields could interact with magnetic fields, and so maybe this is a route that other people can explore, and maybe this will make sensing a bit more easy, or just something a bit different. Yeah.
Okay, so that was basically your PhD work. So
yep.
And so your supervisor or your professor basically convinced you after your undergrad to do your master's, and then somehow also persuaded you, not just that, but also the amazing project that you were so hooked in. You do your PhD, and now you're doing a postdoc. So
yeah.
And how did that come about? And what I would like to understand, we already spoke about your current work in the short podcast, but a more general, like super simplified version. Where does your current research fit in the big picture of materials and nanoscience? Because it's quite a broad field. You mentioned plasma, you mentioned biomarkers, sensors. So just to understand that.
Yeah, so my current position came about basically, I'm at the thesis writing stage this past summer, and I went to the National Canadian Chemistry Conference, CSC or CCCE, and so it's the big one across Canada. Lots of people show up. It's a pretty big event. Now it was online, of course, with the pandemic, so I'm remote in St. John's. Everyone's all over the place. but I gave a poster presentation on my work there. I was chatting with some people, and basically I was talking to some of the exhibition vendors, and they work in plasmonics and very similar things, sensors. And they were based in Montreal and with a company. And so we're chatting, and they're saying, "Oh, you should talk with our." So both of them did graduate school, so they were saying our former, PhD supervisor. He works in this, and I was saying, "Oh, I'm almost, graduating soon." They're saying, "You really should talk to him. I mean, what you're doing is relevant, and he's doing cool stuff. Like, you should chat with him." And so I actually knew who he was. So this is Jean-Francois Masson, who is at the University of Montreal. And so I had actually been following his work for a few years, just having interest in plasmonics and Raman and SIRS, and the fact he was in Canada as well. So I've loved the work he did, and I was saying, "Oh, I don't know," and they convinced me enough. You really should talk to him. So I was like, okay. So I sent him a cold email. I had never actually met him before or anything, but I explained, I'm finishing soon, all of the background stuff, and just you might not have anything available or other reasons, but it doesn't hurt. The worst you can hear is no. And he wrote back to me, and he just said, "You know what, I think I might have something." And so from there the connection began. We met a few times through the fall, and it was a little bit on my part of timing. Finishing up writing a thesis is never super linear, so it was the timing of that. And for him, it was like funding and waiting on grants to come in. So we met about each month until almost the end of the year. And each time it was okay. For me, I was waiting on a few things. For him, he was waiting on a few things. But by December, he was able to, he offered me a postdoc position. And so I happily accepted, because not only, of course, coming out of graduate school, you hope you can line up a job after working so hard and becoming an expert, but also, that I really liked what he was doing and what his research group had done, through the time I was following them. So that's how that came about. So it was all very, some good timing, a bit of luck. And so the work that I'm doing now, it's a bit of a shift from what I was doing before. So it's still in Raman spectroscopy, still with plasmonics, SIRS, surfaces. But now, instead of environmental sensing, which is what I was developing before, looking at detection of hydrocarbons in wastewater or other water bodies, now we're actually more in the biological medical side. So I've had to learn, a lot of biochemistry, which is totally not my background at all. So that's been quite a learning curve. But it's looking into sensing for medical purposes. So the group has done some nanofibers for detection of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's in brain tissues, and other biomarkers there, as well as SPR, which is surface plasmon resonance, which usually deals with two-dimensional sensors, small microfluidics, and you can use a number of different biofluids. So blood, plasma, things like that. But the nice thing with microfluidics is you only need a little bit of a sample. And so you can develop your sensors for, again, a specific analyte of interest, a specific biomarker, or something else in the blood that you're looking for. So so that's been really cool to get more into. And of course, medical sensing will always be relevant, right? We need better technologies. Nobody likes, I don't think, getting huge amounts of blood drawn. So so especially if you're going for a very specific, you're looking for, someone's doctor's looking for, say, a set of maybe 3 biomarkers that, if the presence of all of them are there, confirms a specific disease or condition or something like that. And that's where this could come in, where the surfaces are developed to, grab a certain antibody, grab a certain protein, and we can develop our chemistry to be tailored to a specific purpose like that. So that's the nice thing. And once your system is optimized, it works very well, and only a very small amount of sample is used. So the hard part is the optimization and making sure you're only grabbing what you want out of the sample and letting the rest of the blood pass by, or whatever other fluid. But so it's really cool. Again, totally new for me. So the past few months have been a bit of a whirlwind, but but it's very cool stuff.
That sounds really cool. That sounds amazing. And it sounds to me, Steph, that you have been involved in a lot of interesting research projects, not just right now, but also in the past, everything you mentioned so far. So this is a tough question now. I know it before asking it. If you have to pick one research project that you're most proud of, or the most fun or quirky one, could you pick one and explain it to us in simple words in the section we call In Other Words?
That is a hard question. I think maybe in the future I could talk more about my new work, but since that's so new to me, my reference is more my PhD graduate school project. So yeah, I would say I'm most proud of not only the overall design that we did, which was quite different and with a lot of troubleshooting, but I would say it's the version with those cobalt ferrites, because the results were just totally unexpected from the start. Like my nanocrystal synthesis did not go as expected. I got different products than was reported from, where I got my synthesis from. And then those different products had different properties than I thought I would get. And I'm glad I kind of stubbornly was like, well, I worked really hard to make these. Why don't I just try them in a sensor? I mean, it might be a waste of time because in my head, it wasn't what I aimed to make. So they weren't, I couldn't use them. But I said, okay, you know what? Well, if they're here, I might as well try to make something. And it was from those, from the synthesis that went wrong that I actually got the best performing sensors, which was totally unexpected. And so again, so I'm bringing this back to what I talked about before, but it was our confirmation that the kind of new type of sensor we were looking to make, where we're kind of trying to exploit that magnetic property, but as an actual, as an intentional thing to enhance the electromagnetic field, which is a bit out there. It's definitely, again, it hasn't been super done or well reported on. Probably my supervisor thought I was a little crazy at points, but she was like, she felt that there was something there enough that she let me, run with it. But it was definitely at points where it's like, does any of this logic even hold up? Right? It's a bit, it's totally not common. And there's probably been people at points that think, well, we have Cirrus sensors, we have plasmonic things that work really well. Why would you go to something that might not work? But it was kind of thinking outside the box, which I can see now in retrospect was maybe a little silly to be so optimistic so early on, but it worked out. And so this is our first report that we found using cobalt ferrites as the magnetic material for a 2D Cirrus surface. And it really, again, it brings out that evidence that the magnetic properties are quite important and can be utilized in sensors that are looking to use Raman as the technique. Yeah, and so wow, it worked really well. So again, there's the patent that we were working on, and we were able to bring in this new design as well as an addendum to the original patent design. Reporting on this, I won some prizes at conferences, which was cool. Top talks and posters. And also really cool is just to have other people in the field, come up to me at conferences and they were saying, yeah, what you're doing is really cool. And so it's that confirmation of being like, I'm not just totally out there and in grad school too, I feel like the ups and downs, where the downs are really like, I don't know anything about what I'm doing. It's the worst idea ever. It's never going to work, And so it was really cool to be like, okay, even if what I'm doing is a little strange maybe to others in the field, it doesn't mean that it's, a waste of time or pointless, because something interesting will come out of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this typical story, right? The results were not as you expected, so what you thought was something wrong, that actually is something that you're getting a patent out of now.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. I can imagine, or I can understand why you picked this project as, let's say, one of the projects that you're most proud of. Let's go with that so far.
Yeah.
One of the, and so far, we are being very politically correct.
Yeah.
That sounds really, really, really cool. So, Steph, it's very clear to me that you really enjoy going in the lab and getting your hands dirty, metaphorically, because we are wearing gloves and goggles and everything, always. But other than the research aspect, what else do you like about being a scientist?
I love, collaborating with different people, and especially, in an academic environment, there's people from all over the world with all kinds of different backgrounds. And I find that really interesting, both on the science side, because maybe, somebody has a bit of expertise in another thing that you haven't worked in, or they do things a bit differently, or they took, different courses because the structure was different where they're from, and that gives them a different perspective. And it's that collaboration coming together that sometimes it's just maybe an offhand comment someone says, but it'll spark an idea or help you begin to solve a problem that you wouldn't have come to, on your own. So I think that collaboration, even though we kind of work independently to a point, of course, we're all working as teams. as scientists, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I really like that aspect. And I like the freedom to be able to think creatively sometimes. And again, it's that outside the box thinking where, sometimes to do things in a standard way is helpful, but sometimes, especially, yeah, when you're problem solving, to get creative can bring you to not only solutions, but to different things you wouldn't have even thought you could do in
Mhm.
terms of research, right? So, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
and beyond that, yeah, I also enjoy science communication a lot, and so some of my extracurricular, my volunteer stuff, I'm involved with science fairs and stuff like that. Yeah, and I really like we get so in our niche, specialized. We're all, very educated people working in science, and sometimes it's nice to take a step back and be able to, talk to the average person that doesn't work in science and kind of maybe explain what you do, explain something that's happening in the world, and yeah, the communication to help with a broader understanding for everybody. I find that really cool.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, awesome. That is something that I miss from my past life when I was a scientist as well. Everything that you just said, everything.
Yeah.
I really, really miss that. Um, so, Steph, you have been around as a scientist for quite a few years now. If you were to start out today, based on your experience, what advice would you give yourself or any of the budding scientists who are listening to this podcast? What advice would you give them?
I would say ask as many questions as you can, because it can only help. Not so much for me. I'm annoyingly curious, I would say, and so I never hesitate to ask probably too many questions. But I do know, and especially mentoring, more novice students, some people are hesitant to ask a question or say, I'm sorry, I don't understand what we're doing or what you said, or ask for clarification, or just ask questions of why are we doing this, or how can we do it differently. And I feel like that's the basis of science, right? Is asking questions and trying to find answers. And so, yeah, so I've had students that I'm mentoring, apologize for asking so many questions, whereas I would love them to ask more questions. And I feel like it only helps us to learn more, to understand more, especially sometimes it's safety related too, right? To ask questions, make sure everybody knows what's supposed to be done, what's dangerous, so there's all these elements to it. So I think there are never too many questions is how I feel, and I carry that through to this day. So even in my new role, I'm still asking so many questions to every single person all the time, because yeah, I'd rather know and maybe get on their nerves a little bit than to not. But everyone's really helpful. And yeah, so I think it only helps. And I would say kind of similar to that, don't let fear of something not working stop you from even trying it. So again, things can be unconventional. We have our, standard protocols for a lot of things in science, and they exist for reasons. Maybe they're just a reliable starting point. Maybe it's a safety thing. But when you can, if you have an idea that's, sparked by something and feels a little bit out there, but could also be, the logic stands. It's theoretically something's possible. I say, why not try it? Worst case is, okay, it didn't work, or I can't use it in the way I thought I could. But yeah, you can never predict where something will end up, or what, maybe you try something new and it doesn't work, but it gives you another new idea, and that new idea works. So yeah, you never know until you try. I think that's really true.
That's very, very important pieces of advice. Steph, I hope your experience has been wonderful so far and will continue to be wonderful in the future as well. But if you had three wishes to improve your research experience, what would you ask for? And I'm not promising anything here, okay?
Of course, of course. Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I would say the one thing in terms of a limitation that would be nice. So in an ideal world, especially material science, we work a lot on characterizing new materials, new combinations, etc. And so sometimes I think, gosh, I wish I could do this method to find out this piece of information. And depending where you are, of course, not many institutions have every single piece of instrumentation or machines, equipment. And so I think that would be, at the drop of a hat, to be able to have any characterization method, any instrumentation would be amazing. And beyond that, even if it's there, that it's always available to book the instrument when you want it. Because of course, there's lots of people doing research at the same time, and sometimes you're like, I want to know right now. And so yeah, sometimes having to be patient is extra painful when you really have a burning question, but your instrument's booked for the next few days or weeks maybe. So yeah, so that would be quite nice. Another thing would be infinite supply of lab supplies. So just never having to worry about ordering or anything like that. Some labs have lab managers, but everywhere I've worked has been very much the employees, the grad students, people actually working there, doing the research have to also keep things stocked. And there's nothing more annoying than going to reach for, a certain salt or a certain, pipette tip, and they're all gone. Heartbreaking.
Oh.
So to just have infinite supply, you open up that cabinet and there's just more there than you can ever use in a year. That would be amazing. And then my last one, this is very just personal on me. The patience to spend more time programming and coding for data science. I can be very, I get frustrated really easily sometimes. And I think maybe this is common in science. We're all a little bit perfectionists, and maybe that helps us get to where we are, but it could be a curse as well. And so especially the group I'm in now does some machine learning and things like that. And so the idea would be in spectroscopy, you're collecting data. So what if you could, using machine learning, using algorithms, have an unknown sample and run it through software that has learned from thousands of data sets and can tell you what you have without having to, with your own mind, comb through the different peaks and say, okay, I think it's this. And so that's really cool, also new to me. And I've gone through the codes and everything so far that my research group has done before I arrived. And it's enough that I can understand when I see it, but I'm not patient to do the problem solving of coding. And so that would be, it would be nice. I get one error and I'm like, I'm done here. This is very stressful. I'm done. It's not for me. So maybe in time I'll get more patience, but it's that hard learning curve of sitting down and learning a bit more of Python or whatever other language. So
this meme comes to my mind. This GIF or meme, whatever we call it nowadays. There is this panda who is super frustrated, and he just smashes everything on the desk. I felt like that. I felt seen when I was coding, and exactly what you mentioned. One error, and it's like, done.
I'm finished. Yeah. Whereas other people, it fascinates me. Other people can get an error and they go, oh, interesting. And they enjoy the problem solving. And for me, I find it quite frustrating.
Yeah.
So it's
problem solving in other contexts, it's fine. But when it comes to coding, I'm sorry. No, it has to work perfectly.
Yeah.
And then the error has to tell me what I need to do.
Yes.
Which is of course possible. And so if the program knew, then it would actually fix itself. But that's besides the point.
No, it's same with me exactly. And the coding I've done has been in languages that are fairly intuitive, are fairly readable. So I can't imagine people that are coding in methods that are very much more less the way we speak and less readable. Because to me, that's even more of a puzzle. I just it fascinates me that people are good at it and have the patience for it, because it's not me. My strengths are elsewhere. And again, like you said, I agree. I'm good at problem solving, but there's something about problem solving within coding that, I don't know, it makes my brain smoke or something. It's
No, I then devised this method that if I was coding for my data analysis or creating nice graphs and stuff, I would stack my desk drawers with lots of snacks, really good snacks and really healthy snacks. Or there would be like a anti-stress ball that I would have. And oh my God, it's so fun. But all of that stress, and it did not stop me from continuing to code, which is so fucked up. You hate it. You can't handle it. But no, I want to do it.
It's and I always say, not only with coding but with anything professionally, that a lot of the time stubbornness gets me through it. When someone's like, how did you get through the PhD? I mean, there's lots of different things I could do. Sometimes it's just stubbornness of saying I'm not going to let the frustration win, or the fact that the experiments aren't working. Sheer stubbornness has gotten me through a lot of things, I think.
I started it. That's the plan. I'm going to finish it.
That's what it is. You just have to power through,
Power through, absolutely. This has been so amazing, Steph, getting to know you, getting to know your research, it's your journey, everything. It has been so amazing. Before I let you go to do your science, one last question. What are your learnings from the times that we are living in, which kickstarted, no one wanted it, in 2020.
Yeah, another interesting question. Yeah. And well, I feel like that's part of it too. All of this has made us really reflect on a lot of parts of life, right? So I think there's a lot of things that could be said, but yeah, I'll say that slowing down and taking a break can be good. Science will always be there. It's not going anywhere. There will always be more experiments around. There will always be more papers to write. And research is important, and I think a lot of us, especially if you love your work, you take it seriously, you want to make good progress and do cool things, important things, and so the research is important, but so are other parts of life, right? And so I'm a big proponent of research can't be everything, because then when things go wrong, if that's your whole world, it can be absolutely crushing, right? So to have other things to focus on and other measures of progress, like say in a hobby or a sport or just something else that you also are passionate about, it kind of can carry you through the parts when research are, again, just frustrating you to your core, that you can say, well, that's fine, and I'll figure that out, and then you can focus on the other things that you have going on in your life too. So I think that's important, and to slow down a bit this is also a reminder for myself still, that slowing down is fine. And arguably necessary, because when you take a break, then you can come back fresh, and sometimes that's where the new ideas come in, right? Keeps your problem solving sharp.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, even scientifically proven that taking periodic breaks throughout the day, but like vacation where everything is cut off, not like, oh, let me just check this email.
Yeah. And I think we're all bad for that too, right? It's hard to shut it off. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for sharing those learnings as well. Very, very useful. And Steph, it has been so amazing speaking with you. I cannot wait for you to take over the Twitter account. So thank you very much, and see you on Real Scientist Nano Twitter account.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. I also want to thank my team, Johanna, who is our news editor and curator liaison, Swenya, who is our podcast engineer and curator liaison, Lucia, who is our media and website coordinator, and myself, Pranoti, being the owner of the Science Talk and host of Under the Microscope. To know more about us, visit our website, thesciencetalk.com, and follow us on Twitter at realsci_nano.